Welcome to our video, a heartfelt space to honor and remember those we've recently lost, along with others who have left lasting impacts on our lives. On this 8th September 2025, we reflect on their incredible journeys, celebrate their legacies, and hold their cherished memories close. We'll also talk about the recent challenges faced by WWE star Roman Reigns that have touched millions worldwide. Subscribe now and join our supportive community that keeps their stories alive. Balls Mahoney, April 11th, 1972, April 12th, 2016, was a unique and unforgettable figure in professional wrestling, best remembered for his hardcore style and larger-than-life personality. With his long hair, colourful attire and trademark steel chair, he became a cult favourite among fans who appreciated his fearless approach to the ring. Mahoney began his career in the early 1990s, competing in various independent promotions before finding his true spotlight in Extreme Championship Wrestling, ECW, in 1995. There, he embraced the extreme style that defined the company, thrilling crowds with chaotic, high-risk matches that showcased both his toughness and his comedic charm. Whether brawling in violent encounters or entertaining fans with his antics, Mahoney embodied the spirit of ECW's renegade culture. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, Mahoney was a central part of ECW's most memorable moments, earning the admiration of fans who rallied behind his underdog persona. After ECW's closure in 2001, he continued to wrestle on the independent circuit and later appeared in WWE's ECW revival in 2005, keeping the hardcore tradition alive for a new generation. Outside the ring, Mahoney was known for his warmth and connection with fans, often taking time to share stories and build bonds at events. His authenticity and passion for wrestling shone through both in and out of the spotlight. Tragically, Balls Mahoney passed away on April 12, 2016, just one day after his 44th birthday. His legacy endures as a symbol of hardcore wrestling and as a performer who gave his all to entertain the crowd. Asahi, October 19, 2002, February 1, 2024, was a rising star in Japanese professional wrestling, whose talent and spirit made her one of the most promising young figures in Joshi Puroresu. Born in Gunma, Japan, she displayed extraordinary ambition from a young age, stepping into the ring for her professional debut at just 14 years old. Her first match at the legendary Korakuen Hall immediately set her apart, marking the beginning of what many believed would be a long and decorated career. Competing primarily for Ice Ribbon, Asahi quickly built a reputation for her determination, adaptability, and ability to connect with audiences. Despite her smaller frame, standing 1.5 meters tall and weighing 48 kilograms, she showcased resilience and technical skill that allowed her to hold her own against more experienced opponents. Her work ethic and passion made her a role model to younger fans and a respected competitor among peers. Asahi also expanded her reach into other promotions, including Actress Girls, where she continued to demonstrate versatility and creativity in her performances. She embodied the next generation of Joshi wrestling, dedicated, innovative, and unafraid to push her limits. Her sudden passing on February 1, 2024, at just 21 years old following an apparent car crash, sent shockwaves through the wrestling community. Fans and fellow wrestlers mourned the loss of a performer whose potential seemed boundless. Though her career was tragically brief, Asahi's legacy lives on as a symbol of promise, passion, and the bright future she represented for women's wrestling. Nelson Frasier Jr., February 14, 1971, February 18, 2014, was a towering figure in professional wrestling, whose multiple personas, Mabel, Viscera, and Big Daddy V, made him one of the most versatile and memorable big men in WWE history. Born in Memphis, Tennessee, Frasier's imposing size and charisma allowed him to adapt across eras, leaving a lasting impression on fans worldwide. He first rose to prominence in the early 1990s as Mabel, part of the colourful tag team Men on a Mission with Mo and manager Oscar. With their hip-hop-inspired energy, the trio brought vibrancy to WWF programming, capturing the WWF Tag Team Championship in 1994. The following year, Mabel won the prestigious King of the Ring tournament, transforming into King Mabel and challenging Diesel for the WWF Championship, cementing his status as a top heel. After a hiatus, Frasier returned in 1999 as the sinister Viscera, a dark enforcer within the Undertaker's Ministry of Darkness. His intimidating presence and brutal style added depth to one of WWE's most chilling factions. Later, he reinvented himself once again as Big Daddy V in WWE's ECW brand during the mid-2000s. Managed by Matt Striker, he feuded with stars like CM Punk and Kane, showcasing his adaptability and enduring relevance. Outside of his characters, Frasier was beloved by peers for his kindness and professionalism. Tragically, he passed away from a heart attack on February 18, 2014, just days after his 43rd birthday. His legacy lives on through his unforgettable personas and his contributions to multiple eras of wrestling history. Sidney Raymond Udy, born July 4, 1960, better known to wrestling fans as Sid Vicious, Sid Justice, and Psycho Sid, was one of the most intimidating powerhouses of the 1990s wrestling landscape. Standing nearly 6 feet 9 inches tall and weighing over 300 pounds, Sid's combination of size, agility, and unrelenting intensity made him a standout in both World Wrestling Federation, WWF, now WWE, and World Championship Wrestling, WCW. Sid began his career in the late 1980s and quickly rose to prominence in WCW as a member of the legendary Four Horsemen, where his raw dominance and presence drew immediate attention. In 1991, he moved to the WWF as Sid Justice, even serving as the guest referee for the WrestleMania 7 main event. By the mid-1990s, Sid had reinvented himself as Psycho Sid, a menacing character defined by explosive aggression and unpredictability. His accolades included 2 reigns as WWF champion and 2 as WCW World Heavyweight Champion, making him one of the few to hold world titles in both major promotions of his era. Despite his success, Sid's career was marred by injuries, most notoriously a gruesome leg break in 2001 during a WCW match, which ended his full-time in-ring career. Beyond championships, Sid was remembered for his intense promos, chilling presence, and reputation as one of wrestling's most fearsome competitors. Though retired, his legacy endures as one of the sport's most unforgettable big men, an athlete whose power and persona left an indelible mark on wrestling history. Robert John Blackjack Mulligan Wyndham, November 25, 1942, April 7, 2016, was an influential professional wrestler whose towering size, rugged persona, and fierce in-ring style made him one of the most respected names of the 1970s and 1980s wrestling scene. Standing at 6 feet 9 inches and weighing over 300 pounds, Mulligan was an imposing figure who embodied the image of a tough, no-nonsense competitor. He began his wrestling career in the 1960s, carving out a reputation across regional promotions before achieving national prominence. Known for his intimidating presence and trademark sleeper hold, Mulligan excelled both as a single star and in tag team competition. He was a member of the famed Blackjacks, alongside Blackjack Lanza, with whom he captured the WWF, now WWE, World Tag Team Championship, cementing their place as one of wrestling's most feared duos. Beyond tag success, Mulligan held numerous championships, including the NWA United States Tag Team title, and competed against some of the biggest names in wrestling history. His influence extended to his family as well, mentoring his son Barry Windham and contributing to a rich wrestling lineage that would span generations. Later in his career, Mulligan also worked as a promoter and trainer, shaping the development of young wrestlers and ensuring his knowledge and passion were passed on. In recognition of his contributions, he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2006 as part of the Blackjacks. Mulligan passed away on April 7, 2016 at the age of 73, leaving behind a towering legacy as both a performer and mentor in the wrestling world. Paris became ground zero for one of WWE's most shocking nights as Roman Reigns, the seemingly untouchable tribal chief, was broken down in brutal fashion. Fans came expecting dominance, but instead witnessed Bron Breakker's ferocity and Bronson Reed's brute force collide to dismantle the long-reigning champion. Every spear, every crushing blow rattled the arena, stripping away Reigns' aura of invincibility. The tribal chief looked mortal, the crowd stunned, and the landscape of WWE forever altered. Clash in Paris wasn't just a main event, it was the night the empire shook, and the future of WWE cracked wide open. The streets of Paris, the storm inside Paris, glowed under the Eiffel Tower's golden light. But inside the Accor Arena, a different kind of illumination pulsed. A storm of voices, restless and impatient, chanting and roaring with every song and video package before the main event. The French capital, a city that has watched monarchies rise and crumble, felt eerily prepared to host the collapse of another kind of rule. For years, Roman Reigns had been the unshakable cornerstone of WWE. The tribal chief, the head of the table, the indestructible champion whose aura seemed beyond reach. His tenure had survived cages and stipulations, injuries and betrayals, yet on this night with more than 15,000 fans chanting in French and English, the atmosphere carried the electricity of inevitability. Conversations in the concourse sounded like rumor and prophecy. Camera flashes streaked like lightning. And even the commentary team, normally brash and certain, spoke in tones that betrayed nerves. Paris has a memory for turning points. As the lights dimmed and the stage burned in reds and golds, the sense around the building was not that something big might happen, but that something big had to happen. The air felt heavier than pyrotechnics. It felt like history pressing its thumb against the scale. Roman Reigns, an entrance of power and doubt. When Roman Reigns' theme shook the arena, the sound was volcanic. Boos poured down like acid rain mixed with a current of awe, because even his sharpest critics knew greatness when it walked. Roman emerged with the Universal Championship over his shoulder, his black vest glinting under the lights, his expression the practiced stillness of a ruler who expects obedience. He took his time on the ramp, turning disdain into theatre. Every step a reminder of the years he had spent silencing hostile crowds. Yet Paris answered back differently. Signs bobbing in the sea of heads read, "Paris demands a new king. Down with the chief, and Breakker is the future." Children wore Bron Breakker shirts, teenagers sang and jeered in both languages, and the hatred had a sharpened edge that felt less like routine and more like decision. Behind the gold and the glare, a flicker crossed Roman's face. Nothing dramatic, just a half-second lapse in the smirk, a blink that felt like a premonition. He lifted the title for the hard camera, but the moment didn't swallow the boos. It braided with them. This crowd wasn't here to be impressed. It was here to decide what came next. Bron Breakker, the young wolf on the hunt. Then the storm intensified as Bron Breakker burst onto the stage like a tear in the curtain of the present. He didn't strut. He sprinted, chin forward, shoulders squared, every fibre shouting urgency. He looked like the future compressed into a body, lineage, explosiveness, and the refusal to be second. The Paris crowd reacted with a noise that was half shock and half relief, the kind of response you give when the plot finally catches up to what you've felt for months. Breakker slid into the ring and went straight to the center, eyes locked on Roman, chest to chest with the champion, as if he had been waiting his whole life for this exact distance. Commentary called him the hunter, the heir apparent, the rabid young wolf. Labels that fit because he made them fit, because the ring itself seemed to lean toward him when he stood still. You could watch fans change sides in real time, not out of disloyalty, but out of gravity. Breakker didn't play for the camera, and he didn't perform deference. He simply stood, without blinking, and you could feel the decade behind Roman's reign begin to creak. Bronson Reed, the avalanche arrives. Before the bell, the screens flared again and the arena shifted from storm to landslide. Bronson Reed stepped into the light with the measured pace of certainty, a figure whose power felt less like speed and more like inevitability. He didn't need to glare to intimidate. The geometry of the moment did it for him. Reed's shadow lengthening toward Roman, Breakker already in place like the lightning to Reed's thunder. The noise in Paris changed shape. It wasn't simply cheers or jeers, it was the collective intake of breath you hear when a crowd realizes the math has turned. On the apron, Reed didn't taunt or talk. He looked at Roman the way a mountain looks at a road sign. Acknowledged, but unmoved. The camera found Roman's face and caught the tiniest buckle in the smirk again. For the first time all night, the champion seemed to see the outline of the problem. Not one challenger who could be dragged into deep water, but two forces with complementary weather systems. Together, they looked less like opponents and more like the plot of the evening asserting itself. The war erupts. The bell cut through the noise and Roman cut through the ring. He struck first and hard, a burst of fists that drove Breaker back to the buckles. He turned with veteran economy and hammered Reed with uppercuts, the giant's footing skidding half a step. A Superman punch cracked the moment open, and the building rang as the avalanche rocked. Roman pivoted and launched into a spear that folded Breaker in a clean, brutal line. For a heartbeat, Paris swallowed its own sound. The champion stood over the wreckage of two openings and looked like the man who has always had an answer. Michael Cole shouted about remembered dominance. Corey Graves called it the Roman who doesn't die. The front row leaned forward, recalibrating. For all the rhetoric about the end of an era, there he was, prosecuting minutes the way he had done for years, decisively, angrily, with a refusal to be anything but inevitable. But even in dominance, there was something different, the speed with which the other side reassembled itself. The tide turns. Breaker recovered with predatory speed, springing up into a spear that folded Roman in the opposite direction. The sound of it was not the thud of surprise, but the thud of arrival, and a groan rolled through the crowd as the champion's hands went instinctively to his midsection. Reed followed like punctuation, driving his frame into Roman in the corner and turning momentum into weight. From there, coordination replaced chaos. Breaker hoisted Roman high in a military press, holding him long enough for the camera to drink in the image. A younger future lifting an established present, Paris howling at the tableau. He tossed Roman into Reed's sphere of gravity for a slam that made the ring speak in steel. The commentary lowered its register, not out of melodrama, but out of recognition. Graves murmured that something surreal was happening. Cole, usually the voice of the indomitable, sounded like a man who had run out of certainty. The crowd's thread frayed from thrill to concern and back again as the aura that had armoured Roman for so long started to look like something that could be dented. Every corner of the arena was vibrating with a mixture of disbelief and awe. Fans who had entered with the smug certainty of seeing Roman win again were now leaning forward in their seats, their jeers softening into anxious silence. Social media feeds buzzed with clips and stunned captions, hashtags about revolution and dethroning trending in real time. For years, Roman had absorbed every challenge and returned stronger. Now he was being tilted, bent, and driven into positions fans had never imagined. The tide wasn't just turning in the match, it was turning in the psychology of an audience that suddenly saw the future not as speculation, but as living, undeniable fact. The tribal chief's defiance. If Roman's reign has had a single thesis, it is this: he does not go quietly. He stood when standing seemed optional. He threw when the wiser move might have been to breathe. Another Superman punch slid across the narrative like a shard of flint, and Breaker hit the mat. Roman didn't pause to admire it. He dug in, ran the length of a bad idea turned into a great one, and drove Reed through the ringside barricade with a spear that detonated the border between ring and arena. Debris rattled, cameras snapped, the French chants flipped into the roar that sports grants only to stubborn people. For a beat, Roman stood in the wreckage like a thesis statement written in capital letters. He pounded his chest and the sound resonated with the old cadence, the one that says, "The champion is still the Axis." Paris answered with his name. It felt like a reprieve, a reset, a reminder that dynasties do not end without an argument. But Paris also knows that revolutions don't surrender to good speeches. They keep coming. Roman's fire was undeniable. His willpower reminded everyone of why he had become the standard bearer of a generation. Even in that battered state, he commanded the kind of respect that only comes when an audience realizes they are watching not just a competitor, but a legacy fighting against time itself. The chants of Roman, Roman thundered through the Accor arena. a sound almost unthinkable at the start of the night when boos had filled the air. Fans were no longer watching a villain to jeer, they were watching a warrior claw against inevitability. Yet the cruel symmetry of sport is that effort alone does not always equal survival. Roman's defiance gave Paris one more chance to roar with him, but revolutions, like avalanches, do not reverse course. The final assault breaker came like weather, no malice, just force. A lariat flipped Roman and slammed the canvas into an exclamation point. Reed returned to the ring with timing that felt cruel only because it was correct, compressing space with the kind of impact that drains minutes off the clock. What followed wasn't gore or spectacle for its own sake. It was attrition, the dull poetry of pressure applied in waves. Power moves landed in combinations that didn't need names because their effect was obvious. The champion's rhythm began to stagger. The chants changed colour. Loudness reduced to murmurs, then built again into a chorus asking for the bell. Not because Paris had stopped wanting change, but because it remembered what it feels like to respect a constant. Commentary lost the pitch of play-by-play and slipped into the cadence of concern. "This isn't about titles anymore," Cole said. And for once the line didn't sound like television. It sounded like truth. The referee hovered, nerves in his shoulders. You could sense the moment shifting from match to verdict. The building that had been so loud minutes earlier now carried the uneasy silence of inevitability. A silence punctuated only by gasps as Roman attempted brief counters, each one smothered by Breaker's speed or Reed's weight. In those moments, it became clear that this was no ordinary main event, but a statement being carved into the very structure of WWE. Fans who had long demanded his downfall now looked uneasy, realizing the moment had arrived in ways they hadn't anticipated. There is a thin line between wanting to see someone lose and wanting to see someone erased, and Paris recognized it in real time. The final assault was less about dominance and more about inevitability, the grinding gears of change turning whether anyone wanted them to or not. Silence falls over Paris. It ended without flourish, just a sequence that confirmed what the Accor Arena had sensed for minutes. The aura was gone. As the last impact landed, the crowd's roar collapsed into stunned quiet, as if someone had lowered a volume knob on 15,000 voices. Roman Reigns, who for so long had stood unbroken, lay still at centre stage, not defeated in the traditional sense, but brought to a halt in a way that felt final. Officials hurried to the ring with a seriousness that spoke louder than commentary, their urgency replacing the drama with reality. Breaker and Reed did not gloat, did not posture. They stepped back with the kind of heavy breathing and neutral faces you see in athletes who know they've just carried out something historic. And then Paris did something even harder. It stood. This was the same audience that had booed Roman into the building, that had jeered his every word and gesture, but now they lifted his name as if sending it into the rafters like a paper lantern. Parents lifted children onto shoulders to see history with their own eyes. Longtime fans who had chanted against him for years clapped until their palms turned red. The transformation in the building was palpable. It was no longer about winning or losing, but about recognizing that something enormous had shifted. Roman being strapped to a stretcher wasn't treated as theatre, it was punctuation. The ovation grew because fans understood that when a figure has carried so much weight for so long, the least you can do is honour him when the load is finally set down. In that ovation was respect, sorrow, and acknowledgement. Paris, the city of light and revolution, had witnessed the fall of an empire, and it responded not with mockery, but with reverence. Commentary fell silent, allowing the chants to echo. Social feeds flooded with messages of gratitude. We booed him for years, but tonight we stood for him. It was the rarest alchemy wrestling ever produces, when performance and reality blur into a single truth. On this night, in this city, Roman Reigns was no longer the indestructible tribal chief, but the fallen king honoured by his people. Backstage shock and respect. Behind the curtain, the energy was no less heavy. Wrestlers who had shared locker rooms and main events with Roman lined the hallways, and what they offered wasn't words, it was silence, nods, and space. Veterans who had stood across the ring from him reached for handshakes and shoulder squeezes, small gestures that spoke of respect rather than pity. Younger stars looked on with wide eyes, their faces caught between disbelief and the dawning awareness that the ceiling of their world had just tilted. Roman Reigns had been the axis of WWE for nearly a decade. Entire pay-per-view schedules had revolved around him. Television arcs had bent toward him, and live gates had trusted in his name. Tonight didn't erase that dominance. If anything, it illuminated it by showing how deeply the foundation shook when it cracked. In production trucks, replays of the final minutes cycled in silence, everyone watching as though memorizing the moment to tell it correctly later. Nobody cracked jokes, nobody whispered about time. There was no room for schadenfreude, only the timeless recognition that eras end. For some, it felt like losing a rival. For others, it felt like losing a compass. The building seemed to creak under the shift, as if even the pipes and walls knew they had just lived through the end of a constant. A new age dawns. Meanwhile, out in the ring, there were no fireworks, no confetti cannons, no coronation theatrics. Breakker and Reed simply existed in the silence they had created, their silhouettes cutting stark figures against the floodlights. They had not forged an alliance out of friendship or convenience. They had recognized that their styles meshed like gears, speed into mass, youth into power, inevitability into hunger. The impact of that recognition was visible not just in the ring, but in the mood of the entire arena. Fans didn't see two men celebrating, they saw a picture of the future drawn in outline. They did not need to hoist a trophy or cut a promo. Their stillness was louder than any catchphrase. Paris, a city steeped in revolutions, understood what it was watching. Not a victory in the record books, but a transfer of power. The cold efficiency of a dynasty being folded closed. You could almost imagine the ripple effects instantly. Creative meetings, redrafting storylines, branding teams sketching new posters, fans on social media firing off takes about a new order. The uncertainty was tangible, and it was thrilling. For the first time in years, the central figure of WWE was not obvious, and that absence created a kind of electricity. The crowd, still buzzing, realized they had not just seen the end of a reign, they had witnessed the beginning of something untested, and therefore unavoidably exciting. Conclusion: the fall of a king. Clash in Paris 2025 will not live in memory as just another main event. It will endure as a hinge in WWE's long story. Roman Reigns, the indestructible tribal chief, was not pinned or forced to submit. He was engulfed by the rare collision of a city's hunger, a night's inevitability, and two challengers whose tools combined into something overwhelming. He was carried out not to jeers but to applause, proof that even those who had long despised his arrogance understood the weight of what he had given. Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed did more than win. They closed a chapter. Their silence in the aftermath spoke louder than any speech. That power can change hands without spectacle, that revolutions can be efficient, that the difference between always and until now is one evening. Paris, which has inscribed so many turning points into history, now owns another. The night an empire ended in the squared circle. Somewhere down the road, Roman will return, because that is what greats do, and crowds will judge him again. But they will also rise for him, not out of obligation, but because respect demands it. For now, the sirens that carried him into the Paris night have faded, leaving only the memory of an ovation that belonged to both a fallen king and the people who dethroned him. No empire lasts forever, but the best of them leave an imprint in the air, a shape future champions must measure themselves against. On this night of thunder and reverence, Roman Reigns left such a shape, and two new names, Breakker and Reed, stepped into it, steady and unafraid.